kind words, sympathy, a cheerful fireside, a little dreaming, a little wandering into that world which they had made for themselves with the help of such treasures as that cheap little volume he carried. And then the last few steps, the open door, the room, its air at first of wonderful comfort, and then the queer note of luxury obtruding itself disquietingly. The picture on the mantelpiece, her coming. He had never been in love with Beatrice. He knew that now perfectly well. He had simply clung to her because she was the only living being who knew and understood, because they had mingled their thoughts and trodden the path of misery together. Removed now from that blaze of passion, smouldering perhaps in him through previous years of discontent, but which leaped into actual and effectual life for the first time in those few moments, he realized a certain justice in her point of view, a certain hard logic in the way she had spoken of life and their relations. There had been so little real affection between them, so little had passed which might have constituted a greater bond. It was his passionate outburst of revolt against life, whose drear talons seemed to have fastened themselves into his very soul, which had sent him out with murder in his brain, to seek the man who had robbed him of the one thing which stood between him and despair, the pent-up fury of a lifetime which had tingled in his blood and had given him the strength of the navy in those few minutes by the canal side. He covered his face with his hands, strode around the room gazing wildly out over the city, trying to listen to the clanging of the surface cars, the rumble of the overhead railway in the distance, the breaking of the long, ceaseless waves of human feet upon the pavement. It was useless. No effort of his will could keep from his brain the haunting memory of those final moments. The man's face, handsome and well satisfied at first, the careless greeting, the sudden change, the surprise, the apprehension, the ghastly fear, the agony. He heard the low, gurgling shriek of terror. He looked into the eyes with the fear of hell before them. Then he heard the splash of the black, filthy water. There was a cry. It was several seconds before he realized it had broken from his lips. He looked around the room. He looked around him like a hunted creature. There was another terror now, the gloomy court with its ugly, miserable paraphernalia, the death, uglier still, death and disgrace, a sordid, ghastly thing. And in his brain, too, there was so much dawning, so many wonderful ideas craving for fulfillment. These few months had been months of marvelous development. The power of the writer had seemed to grow hour by hour. His brain was full of fancies, exquisite fancies, some of them. It was a new world growing up around him and within him. Too beautiful a world to leave, yet, in those breathless moments, fear was the dominant sensation. He felt it cowered to his fingertips. He walked up and down the room feverishly, as a man might pace a prison in the first few moments of captivity. There was no escape. If he disappeared again, it would only rivet suspicion the more closely. There was no place to which he could fly, no shelter save on the other side of the life which he had just begun to love. His physical condition began to alarm him. He felt his forehead by accident, and found it damp with sweat. His heart was beating irregularly, with a spasmodic vigor which brought pain. He caught sight of his terror-stricken face in the looking-glass, and the craving to escape from his frenzied solitude overcame all his other resolutions. He rushed to the telephone, spoke with Phoebe, waited breathlessly while she fetched his mistress to the instrument. "I want to see you," he begged, as soon as he was conscious of her presence at the other end. "I want to see you at once." "Has anything happened?" she asked quickly. "Yes," he almost groaned. "I can't tell you." "I will be with you in 10 minutes," she promised. He set the receiver down. Those 10 minutes were surely the longest which had ever ticked their way into eternity. And then she came. He heard the lift stop and his door open. There was a moment's breathless silence as their eyes met, then a little gathering together of the lines of her forehead, a half querulous, half sympathetic smile. She shook her head at him. "You had one of those silly nervous attacks," she declared. "Tell me at once why." "Dane is back. I saw him on the pavement this morning," he exclaimed. "He has been to England to find out." She made him sit down and seated herself by his side. "Listen," she said. "Dane came back on the Orinoco the day before yesterday. I saw his name in the paper. If his voyage to England had been a success, which it could not have been, you would have heard from him before now." "I didn't think of that," he muttered. "I have never asked you," she went on, "to tell me exactly what happened behind there. I don't want to know, only I have a consciousness, I had from the first, when you began to talk to me about it, that your fears were exaggerated. If you have been allowed to remain safe all this time, you will be safe always. I feel it, and I'm always right in these things. Now use your own common sense. Tell me truthfully, don't you think it's very improbable that anything could be discovered?" "That anything could be proved?" he admitted eagerly. "Yes." "Then don't be silly. No one is likely to make accusations and attempt a case unless they had a definite end in view. We are safe, even from the Italiana people. Mr. Raymond Greene has ceased to talk of your wonderful resemblance to Douglas Romilly. Phoebe, the only one who could really know, will never open her lips. Now take me for a little walk. We will look in the shops in Fifth Avenue and lunch at the Ritz-Carlton. Go and brush yourself and make yourself look respectable. I'll have a cigarette and read the paper." "No, I won't. I'll look over these loose sheets and see how you're getting on." He disappeared into his room for a few minutes. When he returned she was entirely engrossed. She looked up at him with something almost of reverence in her face. "When did you write this?" she asked. "Yesterday, most of it," he answered. "There is more of it. I haven't finished yet. When you send me away this afternoon I shall go on. That is only the beginning. I have a great idea dawning." "What you have written is wonderful," she said simply. "It makes me feel almost humble, makes me feel that the very best actress in the world remains only an interpretress. Yes, I can say those words you have written, but they can never be mine. I want to be something more than an intelligent parrot. Philip, why can't you teach me to feel and think things like that?" "You," he murmured, as he took her arm and led her to the door. "You could feel all the sweetest and most wonderful things in heaven. The writer's knack is only a slight gift. I put on paper what lives in your heart." She raised her head, and he kissed her lips. For a moment he held her quite quietly. Her arms encircled him. The perfume of her clothes, her hair, her warm, gentle touch, seemed like a strong sedative. If she said that he was safe, he must be. It was queer how so often at these times their sexes seemed reversed. It was he who felt the womanly desire for shelter and protection which she so amply afforded him. She patted his cheek. "Now for our little walk," she said. "Open the windows and let out all these bad fancies of yours. And listen," she went on, as they stepped out of the lift a moment or two later, and passed through the hall towards the pavement. "Not a word about our own problem. We are going to talk nonsense. We are going to be just two light-hearted children in this wonderful city, gazing at the sights and taking all she has to offer us. I love it, you know. I love the noise of it. It isn't a distant, stifled roar like London. There's a harsh, clarion-like note about it, like metal striking upon metal, and the smell of New York. There isn't any other city like it. When we get into Fifth Avenue, I'm going to direct your attention to the subject of hats. Have you ever bought a woman's hat, Philip?" "Never," he answered truthfully enough. "Then you are going to this morning, or rather, you are going to help me to choose one," she declared, "and in a very few moments, too. There is a little place almost underground in Fifth Avenue there, and a Frenchwoman, oh, she is so French, and all her assistants have black hair and wear untidy, shapeless clothes and velvet slippers. It isn't New York at all, but I love it, and I let them put their name on the program, and they really don't charge me more than twice as much as they ought to for my hats. We go down here," she added, descending some steps, "and if you make eyes at any of the young women I shall bring you straight out again." They spent half an hour choosing a hat, and nearly 2 hours over lunch. It was late in the afternoon before she dropped him at his rooms. Not a word had they spoken of the Sylvanus Power or their future, but Philip was a different man. Only as he turned and said good-bye, his voice trembled. "I can't say thank you," he muttered, "but you know." The lift was too slow for him. He opened his door with almost breathless haste. He only paused to light a cigarette and change his coat and wheel his table around so as to catch the afternoon light more perfectly. Then, with his brain teeming with fancies, he plunged into his work. End of Book 3, Chapter 11.